immigrants to America who come here actually want to be here and have fought to be here, and we're the ones who get shit done here.
Yes.
Because we had to improve it every single time.
That's right.
Immigrants.
So I found this clip online I really wanted to show you, consisting of an interview between two of my favorite comedians. I thought it was interesting in that they're both immigrants to the United States, and they started to talk about the immigration process, the O-1B, green card, et cetera. I wanted to play this clip for you and get your reactions to some of it.
But I felt at home here long before my legal status was solid. That's the tricky thing as an immigrant. But the more I felt at home here, the more cognizant you are of the fact that it's not up to you whether or not you get to stay or not.
Right.
So it was a massive relief to get my green card.
Yes, yeah.
And an even bigger relief to get my citizenship. So I don't think Americans understand how rough the
Yes.
US immigration process
Yes.
is. When they say come in the right way, I don't think they realise how literally impossible that is. When I got my green card, they brought it to me in my office upstairs, and they gave me a Budweiser and an apple pie with a little American flag in it. And I think they were giving it as if, like, here's a joke, right?
Yeah.
Oh, you got it. You were always going to get it. Here it is. And I nearly cried. And for a British person, nearly crying is crying. Yeah. That's as close as I can come. But I was so relieved because I was worried about it so much. When you find out someone just got their green card, you can kind of almost feel the relief coming off it because it's such a concern.
It's not easy. It's not easy.
It is not easy.
In fact, even
It's
don't even
incredibly
talk about the
hard.
green card. Even the visa before the green card.
It's incredibly hard.
It's called the extraordinary ability visa.
Yes.
You
Yeah.
have to prove first of all that you have extraordinary ability, which I challenge anyone to do. Unless you're freaking an NBA player, 7 foot. And then second of all, it's like if you don't constantly prove that they can deport you.
Yeah.
Like if I have a bad segment on the Daily Show,
That's right.
Yeah.
You did not demonstrate extraordinary ability. That was at median level ability. That is the worst thing about coming in on a visa is, like, occasionally they'll look at the visa and say, what do you do? Because they're expecting a surgeon.
Yeah.
You know, someone with a marketable skill. And the moment you say comedian, they're like, this is not for you.
Yeah.
That's not. And also then if it's, oh, go tell me something funny, like, or what? Is this a fun bit? Or is this the moment I get deported?
Yeah. That is such an amazing clip, and it is heartwarming, but also it creates a lot of anxiety for me as an immigration attorney. And I can only imagine how exponentially worse that must feel for a foreign national who wants to come to the United States to work. And I want to address some of the clips in order. So the first thing I want to address is what John Oliver was talking about 10 seconds into the video, where he said, you know, the U.S. immigration system is highly complex.
The more I felt at home here, the more cognizant you are of the fact that it's not up to you whether or not you get to stay or not.
The longer you stay here, the more you want to be here, and the more you become aware that your ability to stay here is not really in your hands or your final decision. It's ultimately up to the U.S. immigration system. And he is right. You don't get to decide how long you stay in the United States. There are hundreds of stories about how arbitrary and capricious USCIS adjudicators can be, even where someone has previously held a 1B visa classification for many years. There is something called the USCIS deference policy, which directs specifically adjudicators to give deference to prior approvals when adjudicating extension requests involving the same parties and the same facts, unless there is a material error, material change, or new material facts that would require a new adjudication of the person's eligibility for O-1B classification. With all of that said, there are numerous cases where USCIS will, without giving any meaningful explanation, suddenly deny an O-1 extension where there are no changes to the facts. And this would leave someone such as John Oliver or Ronnie Chieng in a very difficult position. You've been in the United States now for possibly a decade in O-1B status. You've established a life here, a community here, and a family here. And suddenly you were extraordinary all these years. And a new adjudicator says, no, I don't think so. You're not extraordinary. And that is the fear that many, many artists have when they come to the U.S. So there's this initial relief in getting your first O-1 approved, but when you come up for renewal, that relief is gone because there's the fear that USCIS may deny your O-1B petition.
And these are two artists, two comedians at the top of their game, big names. And they were insecure about this. They were insecure about maintaining that level of extraordinary ability. I can only imagine what it's like for a relatively unknown artist to be going through that same thing.
Exactly. And we'll address that a little bit later. But the next section I want to address is the whole idea of people coming in the right way.
When they say come in the right way, I don't think they realize how literally impossible that is.
If the right way means to you the immigration that existed when your great-grandparents, grandparents, or parents came to the U.S. between 100 to 20 years ago, that system is very much different from the system that exists today. And that's not so much because the rules have changed, but because the demand for visas to come to the United States have increased dramatically. And our system has not changed to address that increase. So we don't have more officers to adjudicate these petitions. We don't have more officers at the U.S. embassies to adjudicate visa applications. The demand has increased, but the actual number of people who can adjudicate these petitions has remained relatively the same over the years. On top of that, there is this really difficult situation when you deal with O-1s in general that you see with other visas, but it becomes incredibly problematic when you talk about O-1B visas. Most USCIS officers receive training on how to adjudicate petitions in general. They do not necessarily have industry-specific training, such as training in the arts. What makes someone an extraordinary comedian, right? What makes someone an extraordinary singer or guitar player or author? What we often see when USCIS challenges these cases is you will give evidence, you will file with evidence that meets the statutory and regulatory requirements, the definitions of what an extraordinary artist is. And I'm going to read that to you in a moment. And instead of accepting the evidence on face value, you have officers who will then interpret the regulations to create a standard that does not exist anywhere. So what they may do is say, well, my favorite musician is this person who has been performing for 30 years and is incredibly well established internationally. And they may say, well, this other person who has only been performing for 5 or 10 years, even though they have been nominated for awards, they've sold numerous records, they have recording contracts with very big labels. The officers may say, that person's not extraordinary, using some standard that doesn't exist in reality. So let me just read to you from the book that I wrote very recently called Cultivating Your Artistry, The Essentials of the O-1B Visa. This book is for foreign national artists who want to understand more about the O-1B visa process, what documents are needed, how one qualifies for the O-1B. And I'd like to read to you the definition of what an extraordinary artist is. So to qualify for the O-1B visa, an artist must possess extraordinary ability in the arts or extraordinary achievement in film and television industries. This ability or achievement must be demonstrated by sustained national or international acclaim. For people in the arts, this means having a record of a high level of achievement. For people in film and television industries, it means a degree of skill and recognition significantly above that ordinarily encountered, and being recognized as outstanding, notable, or leading in their industry. So it seems like that's a mouthful, right? But in essence, what it means is you need to be recognized in your field. You don't necessarily need to be at the level of John Oliver or Ronnie Chieng, who are, quite honestly, extraordinary. You can still meet the USCIS standard even if you are not the household names that Ronnie Chieng and John Oliver are. So in the book, in addition to discussing how to qualify for the O-1B visa, we detail the types of evidence that you can collect to establish your portfolio for eligibility. We also include some case studies from my 23 years of practice to give you an idea about the common challenges that artists and their petitioners face when looking to file an O-1B visa.
One part of the video that really touched me was when John Oliver was talking about getting the green card and the relief that he felt.
They gave me a Budweiser and an apple pie with a little American flag in it, and I nearly cried. And for a British person, nearly crying is crying.
I didn't realize, having never gone through that process, what that was really like. And seeing him get almost emotional about it was actually very touching, but it was also a little surprising to me. Why would that be, such a relief for him?
Well, I can tell you, as someone who didn't go through that green card process, but had to wait 21 years to get documentation to prove my citizenship status, there was always this fear hanging over me that I would get caught, right? Or somehow I would run up against USCIS and I had no documentation to prove my status. And it wasn't until my foster parents hired an attorney. Like for 21 years, I'd been trying. 6 months later, I got my certificate of citizenship showing that I had been born a U.S. citizen abroad, but it was very scary. I had nothing, not one piece of, what people consider, where are your papers or your document. I didn't have that.
Just to be clear for people listening, you were born in Vietnam in 1973 and came here when you were 2 years old?
2 years old. So my family and I came here after the fall of Saigon. We left Vietnam in May of 1975. Mm-hmm. But because of our family dynamic, and fleeing the country during war, we didn't have any quote unquote papers. Like I had a document showing that I made a legal entry into the US, and that document said I was a citizen. But for many years, when I tried to get my certificate of citizenship, USCIS kept telling me I needed a green card, and they kept losing my paperwork. It was just every time I went, it was a different answer. And it was incredibly frustrating that it took 3 months once my parents hired an attorney. But I understand this whole idea of having to deal with immigration because, as John Oliver pointed out, getting the O-1 visa is just the first step. And that is not the end of the road for you, because every time you have to renew, it causes anxiety, because just because you got an O-1 before and USCIS said you were extraordinary doesn't mean that when you apply to extend your status, they'll say, yes, you're still extraordinary.
You have to prove, first of all, that you have extraordinary ability, which I challenge anyone to do. Second of all, it's like if you don't constantly prove that they can deport you.
We have seen cases where USCIS agreed initially that a person was extraordinary, to only find out 3 years later that they're like, no, they're not extraordinary. And what do you do if you've been here many years? Any attorney who says otherwise is actually violating their ethical obligation and clearly has not been practicing long enough to understand how arbitrary and capricious the agency can be. There are very strong cases that should be approved, but USCIS will still challenge them and may actually deny them. And there are instances where there are weak cases that we have had to file because the employer and foreign national have no other option, which USCIS will approve without any kind of challenge. And then there are cases where extensions are filed and USCIS will issue an RFE saying, okay, this person was extraordinary 3 years ago, and you've continued to show that, their name is in the press and that they've won awards, but that doesn't mean that they're extraordinary. So in many instances, USCIS will challenge an O extension based on reasons that are nonsensical and have nothing to do with reality.
Do we see a lot of instances of attorneys or others in the field making false promises, raising people's hopes unnecessarily? Does that happen very often?
I think it does. And usually I encounter those individuals after their cases have been denied. So, when I work with artists, I never say to them, this is a sure thing. This is a slam dunk. This case will get approved without any issue. What I often tell clients is either your case is strong, your case is weak, or these are the areas where USCIS can challenge your case. And what I can say is, based on my experience, I believe this case is a strong case that should be approved, but I'm not the person adjudicating the petition. And there is always room, and I say always because I have filed incredibly strong cases that got challenged. There's always room for USCIS to challenge a petition, no matter how strong it is. Anytime you have to file, there is risk of a challenge and a denial. And for an attorney, that can cause a lot of anxiety. But for a foreign national, that anxiety is increased exponentially, because if you are abroad and your petition is denied, that means loss of a job or employment opportunities in the US. But if you're talking about someone who's already here in O1 status and their extension is denied, that means now being subject to removal or deportation from the US. Losing your community in the US, potentially having to decide what you and your family will do. If you are a mixed citizenship family, is your spouse going to leave the US with you? Are your children going to leave the US with you? It's a very difficult situation when this happens, and it's incredibly scary for foreign nationals. And I think a lot of people don't realize how scary the situation is.
So having worked with you on Cultivating Your Artistry, the book, I became familiar with a lot of things, a lot of details about the immigration process that I had been unfamiliar with. And it was really surprising for me to see Ronnie Chieng talking about extraordinary ability after I've read that so many times for the book and for the audiobook. And to hear him talk about extraordinary ability in such a way, I had never heard any celebrity talk about that before.
Like if I have a bag segment on The Daily Show,
That's right.
Yeah.
You did not demonstrate extraordinary ability. That was at median level ability.
It's really interesting. So Ronnie Chieng is, or was, I don't know what his status is now, is a national of Malaysia. He was born in Malaysia. And John Oliver obviously was born in the United Kingdom. And what they're discussing is the O-1B visa. They're both comedians and actors, and they clearly at some point in their career were on O-1B visas. And he is right in that the O-1 is reserved for the very best in the field. And I think it tells you something, that if both John Oliver and Ronnie Chieng, who are amazingly talented artists, were anxious about getting the O and maintaining the O1 status, how difficult that can be.
The worst thing about coming in on a visa is, like, occasionally they'll look at the visa and say, what do you do? Yeah. Because they're expecting a surgeon. Yeah. Someone with a marketable skill. And the moment you say comedian, they're like, this is not for you.
Yeah. If those two are anxious about getting it, what's the hope for the rest of us and other artists, right? And that was the incentive for me in writing this book, because I really wanted to demystify, if you will, what the O-1B visa is, who qualifies for it, what documentation you need, and how you can work with an attorney to really prepare a portfolio that shows and showcases really how wonderful of an artist you are in your industry. And that's really important, because not that you only have one bite at the apple for the O-1B visa. You can file as many O-1B petitions as you want, but if your first petition is denied, you really need to make sure that whatever perceived weaknesses existed. And I say perceived because it may not be a legitimate weakness. It may, again, be an officer who is using a standard that doesn't exist in reality. But whatever that perceived weakness is, you must address it in the second petition in order for that petition to be approved. So the more denials you have, the harder it becomes to meet that standard with future petitions. So the book is really a mechanism for us to make the topic more accessible, to put at an artist's fingertips what the regulations say and what the policy manual says, because that's what USCIS officers use to adjudicate petitions. What do you need to know? What are the essentials in order to get your visa approved?
And I think it's important to note that while you do have to be extraordinary, you don't have to be at the level of John Oliver to get the O-1B visa. I mean, that shouldn't be discouraging to think of yourself in the same category as John Oliver. You are.
Yes, exactly. Right. There are very few Mozarts in the world, which is why we.
But there's a lot of great musicians. Yeah. But there's a lot of great musicians that deserve to come.
You don't need to be at that level. You don't need to be at the level of Prince or U2. I'm aging myself, but that's who I grew up with. Or Madonna, right? You need to be well known in your field, but you don't have to be a household name.
Was there anything else in the video that stuck out to you?
I really love the part about immigrants getting stuff done that Ronnie Chieng said.
Immigrants to America who come here actually want to be here and have fought to be here, and we're the ones who get shit done here.
Yes.
Because we had to prove it every single time.
That's right.
Immigrants getting it done.
I think it's easy to take for granted the opportunities that people in the United States have when you are born in this country or you're born a citizen, and you don't necessarily have to fight tooth and nail to prove your legal status or eligibility to work in the U.S. or how you belong to the U.S., right? While I don't have the exact same situation that John Oliver and Ronnie Chieng went through, for many years, I didn't have my papers, right? And it was very scary for me. When I applied for jobs, it was really difficult to get work, to support myself. When I applied for school initially, it was really hard because a lot of schools, even back when I went to college, wanted proof of your status in the United States. I was very fortunate when I went to college to have an understanding admissions officer. And by I think it was my second year in college, my foster parents helped me get an attorney to get my citizenship certificate. But I can't tell you how frightening it was when I had to apply for a student loan or a scholarship or a job or go into a federal building, that something that I wrote down would bring me to the attention of immigration. Even getting a driver's license. I couldn't get a driver's license until I had proof of my citizenship because I didn't have any of the other documentation. I didn't have an ID. I couldn't prove who I was. So I think it's easy to take for granted the opportunities available in this country when you don't have to fight so hard for those opportunities.
But do you agree with Ronnie Chieng when he says immigrants get stuff done?
Yes, I like his other word, but absolutely. Immigrants get stuff done. One of the things that I think it's very funny when you apply for citizenship, naturalization, that's not the process I applied for because I was born a U.S. citizen abroad. But when you apply for naturalization, you have to pass a civics exam where you prove your knowledge of U.S. history, the political system, our Constitution. The vast majority of U.S. citizens born in this country who are of adult age would not pass that test. How do I know that? Because when I prep clients for it, I often do not know the answers. I have to look them up in advance. And sometimes my clients have schooled me because they know more about U.S. history and the political system than I do. My life, my livelihood is not dependent on me memorizing the U.S. Constitution. I can tell you that with great certainty, 99% of the clients I have represented for naturalization know the U.S. Constitution much better than I do.
So if a foreign national or anyone else was interested in finding your book, where could they find it?
So the book is available in several different formats on Amazon. We have an eBook, a paperback, and there's also an audible book. The book is also available on Barnes & Noble as an ebook and a paperback.
Oh, and the audiobook, who did you get to narrate
I
that?
have the most amazing vocal actor, Michael Pulcinella, who did the audiobook. So don't be surprised if you get the audiobook, you're not going to hear my voice. You will hear a much more charming, enchanting voice than the dolphin sounds coming through your microphone right now, your speakers.
I was happy and proud to do it, of course.